Hello and welcome to Lesson 2 of bCompiler, the Webmaster course. Our quest in this part of the course is registering a domain name. Throughout this part of the tutorial, we will assume that you have found a vacant domain name that you want to register. And for the sake of example, we will assume that that domain name is example.com. If you have not done so already, Lesson 1 shows you the tools you need to find a great domain name. So let's start by breaking this quest into a few subquests. Understanding how a domain name works, understanding what a registrar is, understanding a registrar's function, choosing a registrar based on that understanding, and registering a domain name from that registrar. Now before I start, I should probably inform you that I have simplified things a bit for the sake of simplicity and brevity. But I promise you that the simplifications I have made will not affect the intended purpose of this tutorial. Now let's start with a scenario that happens every day. A visitor visits a page on bcompiler.com. The key players in this scenario are the visitor, the visitor's web browser, the registrar, the registry, and the web host. The web host has different servers, such as a mail server, a web server, a DNS server, and any other kind of server. It all starts when a user enters a web address into the browser's address bar. The browser then proceeds to ask the .com registry about bcompiler.com. Our browser doesn't need anyone to tell it where the registry is. There's only one registry for .com domains, and that would be VeriSign's registry. Our browser knows where the VeriSign registry is. So the browser asks the registry, where do I find bcompiler.com? And the registry responds with an internet address or IP address. That address is the address of the DNS server responsible for bcompiler.com. Now our browser would ask the DNS server something along the lines of, I need a web page from bcompiler.com. Where would I find it? The DNS server would then hand our web browser the IP address of a web server. Now the browser is almost done. It asks the web server for a page on bcompiler.com, let's say robo.html. The server will then respond by sending the page to the web browser. The web browser would then display that page, and we're done. But wait a minute. How does the registrar have anything to do with this? Okay then. I'm glad you asked. The answer is, it doesn't. The registrar has nothing to do with your website's day-to-day functionality. So what is it that a registrar can do for me? Let's watch the following two slides to help us understand what a registrar's job is. The first function is registering domain names on your behalf, or renewing your domain names for you. This usually happens once a year or so for as long as you want to keep that domain name. So as soon as you want to register example.com, you would visit a web registrar, then pay a registration fee to register a vacant domain. The registrar will then, from behind the scene, pay the registry a registration fee and register the domain name for you. Once the registry acknowledges the registration, the registrar will then pass that acknowledgement back to you, and that domain name is now yours for some time. Another scenario is when you want to point your domain name to your web host. When you're changing a web host, for example, you'd simply tell the registry that you want to authorize a certain DNS server to respond on your website's behalf. But the registry doesn't allow just anyone to talk to it. It will listen only to your web registrar. So in conclusion, a registrar is simply an agent that forwards your requests to the registry. The reason for its existence is because the registry would not talk to you directly. Allow me to point out that you can move your domain name between registrars. It's called a domain transfer. So your choice today is not set in stone. So if you understand where I'm going with this, you'd come to the following conclusion. That since your registrar has nothing to do with your website's performance or reliability, The only criteria to judge a registrar by is price. Well, in many cases, yes, but in some cases, no. So let me demonstrate a scenario where the only important criteria is price, and then different scenarios where other criteria exist. Let's start with the first scenario. In this scenario, you'd say, I only need the registrar to point my domain name at my web host. I might want to add privacy to the domain name, but that's probably about it. In this case, price is probably the only important criteria, provided that you choose a solid registrar that won't go under easily. If the registrar closes down, your domain will probably move to a different registrar, but that's beyond the scope of this lesson. Now, although I highly recommend that you continue watching this video to the end, some of you who are sure that scenario 1 applies to them may want the lowdown right now so that they can close this video and move on with their lives. In that case, here are 5 suggested domain registrars and their prices for .com per year, rounded to the nearest dollar and ordered by price descending. Something probably worth mentioning here is that Godaddy resellers have absolutely no control over your domain names and no access to your payment details. Godaddy runs the entire show from behind the scene. They only set the pricing and do the marketing. I recommend all and any of the above. They are all good registrars. The one I use most is a Godaddy reseller, for many reasons including price, free email, Anycast DNS, etc. But the particular one I use is called Polo Domains. There's nothing special about them except for their consistency when it comes to price. So you can just use Google to find more. The only issue I would look for with a Godaddy reseller is the price consistency and renewal prices. Now this lesson's not over yet, but I've decided to split it into 3 parts. The reason for that is that many don't really want to watch a 30-minute video, but would rather watch a 10-minute video that answers their question. So please proceed to part number 2.